I'm Dave Lester, and I'm joined by two friends to discuss the latest in science news and skepticism. These discussions usually took place in our local pub, and the thought came about to bring these discussions to the world of the tinterwebs in the form of a podcast. And of course, we're accompanied by a drink or two. Welcome to a Skeptics Night In. Hello, David Habs-Havard.
Hello.
And hello to Philip Morris.
Hello.
How are we doing tonight, boys? What are we drinking?
I'm drinking Kronenberg 1664. It's very nice. Having a good time.
Yourself, Dave?
Oh, I've got just Beck's for the air. That's all right.
That's all right.
You boys are so unadventurous. I am drinking Milkwood Nut Brown Ale, the official ale of the 100th anniversary of the birth of Dylan Thomas.
Local boy.
It's a brains brew. Yeah, it's very nice.
Are you getting free beer for that shameless plug?
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
If Brains are listening, we will give a shameless plug. Just give us free beer. We don't mind. Anyone for that matter. People at Jaffa Cakes, whatever, you know.
Well, boys, as the Welsh would say. Well, boys. Moving on to the news section of our podcast. What have we got?
I'm sure you've all heard about the Ebola crisis, but I have got some good news for you lads. It turns out that if you do contract Ebola and die from it, you'll come back as a zombie. So it's not all bad news.
Yay, we're saved.
Screw the 70% mortality rate. We're all right.
Yeah, I've got my bug out bag ready just to get out of London.
Are you ready? Ready for the outbreak?
Yeah, I'm ready for it. Yeah,
I've
so
heard
ridiculous,
that
isn't
one's
it?
hit Carmarthen actually. Carmarthen had an Ebola. It might have been. It was through my Facebook feed, so of course these things you never.
I
know
did hear
how
about this.
legit
Yeah, it
they
was a
are.
scare, wasn't it? Apparently, but it
Yeah,
obviously is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's bollocks.
You don't even live around here. It's like bollocks.
I saw it on Facebook as well, but I go on reported outbreaks from WHO, World Health
Yeah,
Organization, not Facebook. So I did not see it on the WHO website that we've had one in Pembrokeshire.
And thankfully, you don't get your information from the Daily Mirror either. Who was
Is
the
that
person
where
who?
the zombies?
This is where the Ebola zombie thing cropped up for me. That's where I
The
first saw
bloody
it.
tabloid press.
Yeah, 2 victims have risen from the dead.
And of course, there's a doctored photo, isn't there?
There is a doctored photo. Yeah, it was. I think it originated on a sort of spoof website, American spoof website, and they doctored a picture from the film World War Z, and just posted that on there. But a lot of places have gotten hold of it and used it as a zombie has been photographed, which is obviously nonsense.
In the picture was Brad Pitt killing one of them.
Yeah, very
Killing
sick-looking
an
Brad
Ebola
Pitt. Not to give anything away.
White villager fights the zombies back.
I mean, on a serious note, though, you can see the sort of reason why this sort of might have come about. Liberia, West African countries, there's a lot of voodoo, that sort of thing. So, from what I understand, some local newspapers did actually report people rising from the dead. Unlikely that there's anything real in it. Maybe if anything was to have happened there, it's possible that 2 people were pronounced dead, but weren't actually dead when they took them to be buried. Possibly.
Yeah.
But it's unlikely that there's anything in it at all. So.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. Do you know how much? This is a bit of news I came across in the Eye, my form of paper media that I get my information from. Can you guess how much Ebola.com is worth?
Oh,
Loads. I
Loads,
think I read about
probably.
this.
Loads.
Was it like 5,000 or something, or 50?
Oh.
I don't know. It was 50.
interesting you say 5,000 because that
5
was the
million.
price that he originally bought it for.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It cost
$5,000
5,000.
when he
Oh,
first
right.
got it. Yeah, but now he's asking for $150,000 for Ebola.com.
What? No.
$150,000.
Surely not 150,000.
Yeah, he reckons it's
doesn't-
worth much. The guy, he specializes in disease-specific domain names.
And
He's got-
who buys these? I really want Ebola.com for my website. What?
150,000.
Yeah. He's also got H1N1.com. and
Oh, isn't he? He's saving one for a rainy day, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
It's like his nest egg, yeah.
Birdflu.com.
Oh,
From when that one hits us, pandemic.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
He's got
that
one
is,
up his sleeve.
it's very, it's very sadistic, isn't it? But it's genius at the same time. It's very clever.
Yeah,
It's
a
sick,
bit dark,
but
it's a
clever.
bit dark.
Yeah.
That's one way to make your money, bit of investment.
So
Yeah, but I thought that struck me as quite an interesting news article that somebody's taken the time to delve and spend their hard-earned money on on disease-ridden domain names.
Yeah. So, seeing as we're talking about news stories in Ebola, I thought we should just have a bit of a fact file, a bit of background behind Ebola. So Ebola was discovered in 1976, and in the current epidemic in West Africa, there have been more cases and deaths than all of the other outbreaks combined, which is a big number. The current cases is 13,042, and the deaths are 4,818 as of the 2nd of November. That's a lot. That's a lot. And
a lot of people. Yeah.
the reported case fatality rate is 70.8%, which is very, very high.
It was only 50% at the beginning of the outbreak, though, wasn't it? It's gone up.
Yeah, the WHO have they reevaluated it in September, pushing up to 70.8 after reassessing. But also the WHO think that the current case rate could be 3 times the suggested number. I'm not sure why they've said that. They're probably just being, I don't know, playing it safe. Who knows? But they think there could be a lot more cases than that. And they also think that the amount of cases per week could jump up to 10,000 a week by December.
10,000 a week.
Damn. What is that? Is that specifically in West Africa then?
I think that's total cases, but most of them are in West Africa. Most of them are within Guinea.
Yeah. And Ivory Coast, is it?
No, Ivory Coast.
Liberia, is it? Sierra Leone?
Yeah, those are them, yeah.
Main ones.
But of course, we only really kicked up a fuss once, like, Westerners got infected. It's like, oh shit, there's people from the West getting.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I think it would have been in the press if Americans or whatever hadn't have got it, because it is a substantial outbreak.
Yeah, the World Service would have glossed over it, I'm sure. Right.
And the early,
exactly.
the early outbreak, when people, Westerners got it, they were given a vaccine. The vaccine works because it's been tested on people. It's not been rigorously tested, has it?
Well,
No,
you're talking about You're talking about Z or ZMapp, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is the interesting thing about ZMapp is that the limited supply which they had has been used to treat 7 infected people.
Yeah.
Although some of them recovered, the outcome is not considered to be statistically significant at the moment. It has been proved to be highly effective on rhesus monkeys, but there isn't currently enough scientific data to say whether it's significantly significant in humans. Although the A&M University, they stated on the 8th of October that they are preparing to mass produce the ZMapp drug, and that's just pending final approval. So I would say that the ZMapp treatment is most likely to be effective, but we don't know yet. There
Can
needs to be more
you
testing.
explain briefly how does the actual vaccine work in terms of attacking Ebola?
Well, it's a combination of what are called monoclonal antibodies. So basically, they pump you full of these antibodies that I believe they attach to the outside of the virus to prevent them from infecting cells, basically. Is that right, Phil?
I think it's something like that. I think it coats the cells though, rather than the viruses, to prevent it from latching onto the cell, so it can't actually enter it and produce.
Okay, yeah.
So
monoclonal.
I think it basically just gives the body time to come up with an antibody to combat it. Basically, it slows down the rate of reproduction of the virus, I believe. Yeah, the interesting thing about the ZMapp vaccine is, I thought it was interesting anyway, that they produce the protein in tobacco plants. They alter the genetics of tobacco plants to produce the protein for the vaccine.
So kids, take up smoking. And
That's
not the message we're trying to endorse here, Dave.
Kids, do not smoke. or smoke, I don't care. Yeah, so there are multiple drugs that have begun clinical trials. And there are also 3 Ebola vaccine candidates at the moment. One of them is being developed by GlaxoSmithKline, and it's being administered to volunteers in Oxford and Bethesda. But also in October, they were administered to a group in Mali. And if these trials are successful, then the vaccine will be fast-tracked for use in West Africa. So there's possible candidates for treatments and vaccinations. So I suppose we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
And just to finish off, there's a final good news story here. The Telegraph printed yesterday that International Development Minister Desmond Swayne has dismissed concerns that Ebola is spread by zombies.
Hey!
The Tory frontbencher told the Commons he had to enlighten a constituent who believed zombies were responsible for the escalation of the killer virus. Fantastic.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Oh. I believe we've got another segment for our news section, which is the subject of diabetes. I believe you've got some information for us, Habs.
Yeah, so I read an article on the Harvard website about a really interesting study looking into using basically stem cells to treat type 1 diabetes. And this paper in question, the name of it is Generation of Functional Human The paper is Generation of Functional Human Pancreatic B Cells in Vitro, and it is by Paglivka and colleagues, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, in Douglas Melton's lab. And essentially, diabetes affects more than 300 million people worldwide. That is a large number. And yeah, so type 1 is basically an autoimmune destruction of these beta cells in the pancreas, and these are the cells that create insulin. And then type 2 diabetes is when you get tissue insulin resistance and B cell dysfunctions, which so basically just your cells don't allow the insulin to attach to them as easily. And it's pretty serious because in type 1 diabetes it's been reported that you can live 20 years less, and in type 2 it can be up to 10 years less. So this is reported improvements in diabetic care has meant that these people are living a hell of a lot longer than 30 years ago. So I don't believe those numbers are as high as that. They're probably a lot lower nowadays, maybe 5 to 10 years. And so type 1, it can be cured by a transplant with a cadaveric human islet, which is the part of the pancreas. So like just a organ donor from an organ donor. And this means that patients can be insulin resistant for about 5 or more years. So having a method where you can produce basically an infinite amount of these beta cells could extend therapy to millions and millions of people. So this is why this paper is so interesting. And it can also be used for drug discovery as well, so for like testing new diabetic drugs.
Yeah, so I've heard about this, but I also heard that they were using human embryonic stem cells to treat people with heart conditions in France.
Oh, right, okay.
About 6 people with heart failure be treated with like a patch of immature heart cells made from these human embryonic stem cells, in the hope that it could regenerate heart muscle that they've lost due to heart attacks previously.
Well, I heard that a guy who was paralysed from the shoulders down has actually started walking due to stem cells.
No, that was slightly different. He had he had like a tear in his spinal cord, about halfway down his back. And what they actually did, they took a big nerve within the nose, and then they grafted that onto this kind of the gap in his spinal cord, and then it grew from that because in the nose, basically it's the only place when new nerve cells get where they produce new nerve cells. Everyone else in the body, you don't really produce new nerve cells, so that's why they chose this olfactory nerve. So yeah, I do believe he's walking though. That was really, really interesting. And I think now he has some feeling in his legs and some control over his bladder, which he didn't have before.
That's incredible. It's
Wow.
amazing what we can do with science these days.
I know. Science is awesome.
We should make a podcast about it, boys.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Next up, we have Seeing Through the Myths. Take it away, Havs.
So yeah, this week I'll be talking about the myth that we only use 10% of our brain, which is bollocks. And it's surprising how many people believe this. I've heard it off so many people.
It's recently enforced in that film, wasn't it?
Yes, Lucy. Have you seen it?
No. I have not.
No. Don't see it. It might be worth it just for the cringe factor. It was absolutely terrible. Morgan Freeman kept going, Lucy only uses we only use 10% of our brain, but Lucy has managed to use more, and then she has these superpowers because of it. And man, it's such a bad film. Yeah,
because in actual fact, we use a lot more than 10% of our brain just for normal function. So like breathing.
Yeah, as we're chatting, as we're chatting right now, we're using about 90% of our brains.
Yeah, you've got to think about cognitive function, like the ability to be able to speak, breathing. Yeah, like you said, it's all going
Sight
off, isn't it?
well.
Things that you're unconscious about.
It's all working, and you can see it if you look at like an fMRI scan of someone listening to classical music. You'll see more or less the whole brain light up. It's I don't know where this has stemmed from.
I think it stemmed from that we only know about, wasn't it? We only know about 10% of the brain, and not we only use, but we only know so much of how the brain works. I wouldn't be able to give you figures.
My theory is that it might be that people are confusing that we only 10% of our brain is used for conscious things, whereas the other 90% used for unconscious, voluntary things. That's the only way I could think that can make even the slightest bit of sense. But people will just listen to whatever people tell them, basically. I think it originated from a radio show in the 90s, I believe. But yeah, it's lies, and please tell everybody because it annoys me.
Yeah, there's lots of strange myths that have cropped up on the internet and things like that, which is something that we're going to tackle in the next few shows.
Yeah, seeing through the myths. Moving on to our main topic, climate change.
So the main topic of conversation today is going to be how dangerous is climate change? Climate change is the gradual, warming of our climate. It's not lies. The I quote IPCC report 2014, human activities changing the climate.
And what is the IPCC report?
The Governmental Panel for Climate Change produces a report every few years, basically collating all the scientific community's research on the subject of global warming and climate change. They give policymakers somewhere to go. So obviously there's so much research out there to talk about that people in Westminster, they're not going to sit down and read all that. Even your science minister's not going to read all that stuff. They put it in a nice, neat package for policymakers to understand.
Is it like a meta-analysis then?
Yeah, kind of. But they have a summary for policymakers, but they also have a technical summary as well. So they can collate all this information and produce some really lovely graphs. What is dangerous about climate change? The average temperature of the world is heating up, and projections at the moment show a mean average temperature rise by 2100 of 4.8 degrees. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but if you consider that the world is 24,000 miles in circumference and several miles deep of the atmosphere, that's a pretty huge temperature change across the globe. Obviously, not all of the temperature change varies in different parts of the world, but it's this average increase that changes things, because what you get polar regions getting warmer, the ice starts to melt, and equatorial regions, they'll get hotter as well. So you'll get increased desertification, so the deserts will get bigger. Places that weren't semi-arid will become semi-arid, and you'll get water shortages, people dying of lack of malnutrition and lack of water and things like that. But on the caveat to that as well, people in the north, more extreme weather events causing flooding, people die from that. It's massive, it's huge, and it's only going to get worse over the next 100 years or so. So, is climate change dangerous? I would say, on balance, yes.
But why is this a bad thing, Phil? Surely the Earth going up a few degrees in temperature is a good thing. Longer summer holidays for all.
No, exactly. This is the thing in the media about public perception about what climate change means for us. It's not a case for us of better summer holidays. It was so cold in the east coast of America last year, and people were going, well, what's all this about climate change? Well, they actually found that climate change could have had a direct link to what they coined the polar vortex.
Oh, I love that word. Oh, it's amazing.
I know, it's such a good word.
The polar vortex.
It's such a good name. I like it when they name things good. What causes that? What they think causes that is that because the temperature gradient between the poles and the equator, it gets shallower. With warmer temperatures in the poles, the temperature gradient is shallower, so there's not as much difference between the poles and the equator as you'd expect. And so what happens is it has the effect of weakening the circulation in the jet stream.
But also
that pulls it south.
Does that happens in air and water, doesn't it?
It's different because obviously in In the water, there's a load of land getting in the way.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's not the same. If there was no land, it would be it would be exactly the same. It'd be very similar anyway. Obviously, it's a different medium, but they're still fluids, so they would move very similar. Because there are an awful lot of factors that influence. Say we're talking maybe the North Atlantic deep water formation. So the thermohaline circulation is what we call it. It's a circulation which is governed by thermo, heat, and saline, salt, salinity of the oceans. So warm water will go north, get to the area which is known as North Atlantic deep water formation, and it'll sink because it's saline, it's warm. It'll sink at that point because it's denser. The snow makes it denser, and then it'll get to the ocean floor and it'll move back south. Differences in temperature gradients will affect that. So that what they're suggesting is there could be a slowdown in these atmospheric and oceanic circulation systems, and they will cause extreme weather events.
So, say we've been pumping out these carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution. Is that the prime responsible factor for these dramatic changes in climate?
There is a suggestion, or I don't know how credible it is, but there's a suggestion that it could go back further than that, because we started chopping down trees a lot earlier than the Industrial Revolution, just to make space for us all for farming and things. We could have like been preventing because the vegetation was a massive sink for CO2 drawdown. I don't know how much, like, it's just a suggestion, I think. I don't think there's
it's an interesting idea anyway.
Concept, yeah.
Yeah, because I read an article the other day. I don't know how much how actually scientifically accurate this is, but I think it was more fear-mongering, really. It was saying because you have this temperature difference between the pole and the equator, and it's going to become less, then that's going to slow down certain, the haline. What do you say? The thermohaline
circulation.
Circulation, yeah. And then you'd get pockets of anoxia in the water, which is basically just reduced oxygen because the oxygen's not going to be able to get circulate in the water well enough, and then you're going to get a massive loss of sea life. Like, do you think that could happen?
I think that before something like that happens, you'll have a massive loss in sea life anyway. But
is that from acidity?
I think you're talking about it was the Permian-Triassic extinction, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were thinking that could happen again or something.
Yeah, it was a massive volcanism, I think, at the time, and that pumped loads of like greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and caused essentially the same sort of thing that's going on here. I don't know the numbers on this. How much CO2 was pumped into the atmosphere to cause that that level of shutdown?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I suppose it's hard to tell.
It's difficult to say. I don't know the numbers on it. I can't imagine, because this will all have happened at once.
Yeah,
it would have been a massive. Being pumped into the air from huge events, lots of huge like events. Because the volcanism back then was really powerful. We're talking about like the level it is on Io or something. Pretty big. But yeah, there's lots of. I think there's lots of different links to the past. If you look at the paleoglacial record, there is a lot of links to stuff that could happen with increased temperatures. There's the...
Well, how about sea level rises? I mean, there hasn't always been this much water.
Been sea level rise already, and most of that is currently due to what's known as thermal expansion. So that's where the water is literally warmer, so it occupies more space.
That's amazing.
Simply, yeah. The other obviously contribution then is through melting glaciers.
What's an ice albedo forcing, Phil?
Ice albedo forcing. So that's literally the amount of solar radiation that gets reflected back into space from there being this sheet of ice, white ice, essentially, on the surface of the Earth. If that ice melts, you've got all of that solar radiation going to the ocean, and it gets drawn down, it warms up. The ocean appears black from space because solar radiation is, there's not much reflection there. So it's a direct feedback. So warmer oceans mean, more melting of sea ice, and so on.
And the pattern keeps going.
And the pattern increases. It's a feedback mechanism, and it's partly responsible for the reason why polar regions have warmer temperatures than equatorial regions. Comparatively, the rise is comparatively higher in the polar regions than it is equatorially.
Say if we stopped all CO2 emissions, everything was carbon neutral, how much do you think the Earth would still heat up by? Like, do we know?
There'll still be heating because those feedback mechanisms, like I said, are already in place. If you listen to people like James Lovelock, he would tell you that there'd be no difference. But the IPCC have done some scientific community, I should say, and models of this. Most of the time what they do is when they run model simulations, they'll do a high emission scenario and a low emission scenario. So they'll look at the difference between, if we say doubled CO2, if we stopped CO2, or if we kept it the same as what it is at the moment. A low emission scenario see warmings of between 0.5 and 2 degrees by 2100.
Oh, okay.
Still significant compared to 5 or 6, It's much better, obviously, Because if you consider at the moment, we have seen the effects of climate change so far. So we've seen things like, the extreme weather events that I spoke about. We've seen things like ocean acidification is happening at the moment. That's to do with carbon dioxide diffusing into the oceans. When that happens, it displaces, it creates, I think it's bicarbonate and hydrogen plus ions. Hydrogen plus ions and bicarbonate ions as well. That increases the acidity of the ocean. What that essentially means is that because a lot of ocean creatures are made out of calcium carbonate, and calcium carbonate, as you know, will dissolve in weak carbonic acid.
I didn't know that.
House does. It means that ocean creatures will dissolve in higher acidity conditions. And there have been a couple of studies I think it was in Nature a few years ago, found evidence of sea life made out of aragonite, which is a form of calcium carbonate, denaturing in situ. So they were swimming around and dissolving at the same time. So
crazy.
It's nuts. And what it means is it doesn't take an awful lot of a drop in pH really to see coral reefs dying on a large scale. Coral reefs are built on the remains of dead coral reefs. So they're all built on calcium carbonate mounds, if you like. And so not only might the actual coral organisms break down themselves, but the stuff that they live on will break down as well. They're seriously worried about things like the Great Barrier Reef disappearing by 2050. And that will cause, it's an ecosystem that supports so many different species. A massive drop in diversity of that is going to have a knock-on effect through speciation and things like that, where the stocks in the ocean are severely depleted, and that'll damage us as well. Crop production as well. Like if you've got semi-arid areas, they won't produce as much crops. People starve.
Like what you're saying, even if we just stopped CO2 into the atmosphere now, like all of it, we're still going to get hotter, and this heat is then going to release, I know, CO2 held in, is it peat or something? Like frozen, like methane.
Oh, you mean you're talking
frozen
about
methane.
melting of permafrost?
Yeah, so that's going to increase the temperature even more, and it's going to keep going up and up. And yeah, where does it all, like what do we do? Like, do we just stop completely and hope this temperature evens out? And like,
what you're talking about is the difference between there's going to be a heating up. That's going to happen, but you're talking
Yeah.
about the difference between that actual increase in temperature being 4.8 degrees or like 1.2.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And there is a significant difference there.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to be a lot.
Well, actually, I read something badass the other day. I think last year these scientists came out with this idea that, if we can't stop this massive increase in climate change, that they can have these solar-powered boats that travel through the sea, right, and then pump up salt into the atmosphere to make clouds more reflective.
Oh, brilliant! There's the actual data on it is not good enough. And they also don't know what other, like, because I think sulfur dioxide they'll put into the atmosphere to make the clouds more reflective.
That is one method. The other is literally just salt, having the clouds full of kind of salty water.
I've also heard a geoengineering solution where they pump loads of iron into the Southern Ocean, and the Southern Ocean, the limiting factor for growth of cyanobacteria is
so
iron.
like algae blooms or whatever.
Yeah, so if they're thinking algal
Or whatever,
blooms,
yeah.
draw down CO2, but of course, with any algal bloom, it's eventually going to die. But any studies that they've done trialing this has not really shown a significant drawdown of CO2. They also don't know with things like pumping salt and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. So there are solutions. There are like geoengineering solutions. I don't think that's the way forward. I think it is literally curbing CO2 emissions. I just want to talk briefly about some of the misconceptions that the public have about climate change. Things like, oh, it's all happened before though, isn't it? Climate change has happened before. I think what a lot of people misunderstand there is that, yeah, there has been climate change in the past. If they're talking about the quaternary record of climate change, then it's all pretty regular. It all happens in these specific cycles, which are governed by things called Milankovitch forcings, which are literally to do with the way that the Earth rotates around the Sun. So the angle of rotation, the eccentricity of the orbit, its obliquity, they all influence the climate certainly throughout the Quaternary period. So what you get is, say, 14,000 years ago, we had greatest extent of the last ice age, and then it started to get warmer, and then it plateaus off for a few thousand years before it starts to get colder again. And that happens roughly every 100,000 years, without fail, in the Quaternary record that we've got, which we got from ice cores up to about 250,000 years ago, something like that, and deep sediment cores, which go further back again. They all correlate with each other, so we know that they're right. So when people start saying, "Oh, it's gotten warmer," he said, "Yes, it has gotten warmer in the past, but only from an ice age. We're not in an ice age at the moment."
So basically, when we say climate change, we really mean human-made climate change.
Human-induced climate change, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what people misunderstand, I think, sometimes. It's just a misunderstanding that some people have about...
People say it all the time, and I'm just like, oh God, read a book.
Another thing that some people like to say that I don't understand what all this ice sheet melt is all about. The Antarctic ice sheet is actually growing. There you go. My dad said this to me before. And I know where they've got it from, because it's... I don't know if they've read it in the media or something. The media has misrepresented it or not. But it's because the East Antarctic ice sheet is increasing. Its net balance is increasing. So its net mass is increasing. But the West Antarctic ice sheet, contrast, is melting. So the net balance of the whole ice sheet is actually getting less. It's actually melting.
Why is the east
but-
one increasing?
Because the global temperature is warmer. It means that, and warmer air holds more moisture. It means there's more precipitation, more sublimation onto the East Antarctic ice sheet, because it's almost always below zero.
Right, that's interesting.
And it's grounded. It's entirely grounded. Whereas the West Antarctic ice sheet is more. There's more contact with the ocean, and the ocean is what melts it, because the atmospheric temperature is usually below zero, but the ocean temperature, obviously, because it's not frozen, is more towards zero, and maybe slightly warmer than that. So that's what melts it, and you get the things like Larsen B ice shelf, which collapsed 2000. Oh God, I can't remember, 2001, something like that.
Early 2000s.
Early 2000s, yeah. What happened was that what the ice sheet does is it buttresses. This is sea ice now, because it's all on water, but it buttresses the ice on the land. And when the ice shelf collapsed and all this ice into the Southern Ocean, all the ice that was being buttressed by that ice shelf fell in to replace it. So you're getting a net balance of going from the actual ice sheet into the sea, which, as you know, will increase sea level, and also contribute to the net loss of the West Antarctic ice sheet. So when people say the Antarctic ice sheet is actually growing, it's not growing. It's not growing because the West is melting so quickly compared to the East. There is a extreme event out there. There's an idea of an extreme event out there whereby the whole of the West Antarctic ice sheet could fall into the Eastern Ocean. It's pretty unlikely. They've modelled its possibility. It could, in theory, happen, but it's just very unlikely, and that would cause large chunks of the West Antarctic ice sheet just to drop to the Southern Ocean, which
What would
cause,
happen?
Big increases in sea level in very little time at all.
So what are some of the other myths then?
People do like to say there's the tax conspiracy, of course. The whole thing's just a tax conspiracy. And all of the scientists are in on it. Every climate scientist in the world is in on this.
That's because scientists are so
what
evil.
For money? I don't know.
Yeah,
Because there's a lot of money
we all went
so much money in research.
Yeah, exactly. That's why scientists go into it. They're just in it for the money.
Which leads us brilliantly onto what's the cost. Take it away, Phil.
Yes, every week I will be giving you boys a little game. The game is what's the cost. I read out 3 items, and you have to try and guess which cost the most and which cost the least.
Oh, God.
So let's get right to it. The first item, the cost of filming Gravity, the cost of sending a probe to Mars by the Indian Space Agency, and the third one is the cost to Real Madrid of buying Gareth Bale off Tottenham Hotspur. Right. Do you want to go first? Oh, Dave, do you want to go first?
Right, well, okay, I'm going to say that, the one that really grabbed my interest there was the probe to Mars. I don't think you can send a probe to Mars very cheaply at all. It's got to be, close to 200 million. It's not cheap to get something into the stratosphere. Next up, I'm thinking Gareth Bale. Now I know he was one of the world's most expensive transfer, but is it going to cost more than it is to film George Clooney and Sandra Bullock in Gravity? No, I'm going to have to say that Gareth Bale would be the middle one. The most expensive is the Indian space program, and Gravity was the least expensive.
Okay, Havs?
Right, I think I've read about this. So I'll start with filming Gravity. I'm pretty sure that was $100 million US dollars. Gareth Bale, I know he was 90, something around 90 million pounds, which I'm not sure on the exchange rate. Let's say that's $150 million. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Indian space program, surprisingly, I think it's about 50 million US dollars.
What?
So the lowest I'll go for Indian space program to get
Nah.
a thing onto Mars. Then I'll go filming Gravity as the middle and Gareth Bale as the most.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, I'm going to take these from most expensive to the least expensive. The most expensive item in this list was Gareth Bale.
Yay!
Oh, come on.
I mean, that's
At a cost.
disgusting.
It's disgusting. Yeah. At a cost of £85 million, 100 million euros, or if you convert it to US dollars, 135 million US dollars. Very expensive for one player. The second one in the list, at a cost of $100 million, well done, Havs, the filming of Gravity.
Yay!
It cost $100 million to film George Clooney and Sandra Bullock in space. Which means that the cheapest item on the list was the Indian Space Agency's mission to send a probe to Mars at a cost of only $74 million.
That's mad.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
It is mental. It cost Real Madrid almost twice as much money to buy Gareth Bale than it did for the Indian Space Agency to send a probe to Mars.
The mind boggles. Like,
it costs more to make a film about people going into space than it did to take things into space. It blows my mind. And to Mars as well. To Mars. The
But what you
amount of
have to remember,
technology
Havs,
behind that.
What you have to remember, Havs, is that to send a probe to Mars, the catering is a lot cheaper than a whole crew. Cast and crew.
Yeah, and you don't have to employ George Clooney.
True, or Sandra Bullock.
yeah,
This is true.
hefty
That's
price tags
ridiculous.
there.
So well done, Havs. Well done for getting those right. That's brilliant.
I mean, I'm happy I won, but I'm a bit sad by the state of the world.
Agreed.
I think that pretty much wraps up our show, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a big thank you to the pair of you. I've really enjoyed being a part of it, and I hope you as listeners have enjoyed it as much as I have being here. Thanks, guys. Yeah, nice one.
Thank you very much. We'll be
Yeah,
back.
cheers, boys.
We'll be back end of November, hopefully, for another edition.
Yeah.
And if anyone has any questions or things that they'd like us to cover, you can just email us at skepticsnightin@gmail.com.
Thank you very much.
This has been Skeptics Night In.